Hello, I'm Atsuki Hirano from the New Diplomacy Initiative. Today I will be talking about the plutonium problem in Japan and its relation to the country's nuclear fuel cycle. First of all, plutonium is the most toxic substance that humans have encountered. This is because plutonium is highly radioactive. Also, apart from uranium, plutonium is known to be the material for atomic bombs. In fact, the atomic bomb Fat Man dropped on Nagasaki, Japan on August 9, 1945 was made from plutonium. The name plutonium is derived from the planet Pluto, and the properties of plutonium make it suitable to carry the name Pluto, which means king of the underworld. Currently, Japan possesses approximately 46 tons of plutonium. This is equivalent to about 6,000 nuclear warheads. Japan is the only nation to have suffered nuclear bombings during the war. Also, Japan is a non-nuclear weapon state under international law. That being said, it's surprising that Japan had such a large amount of plutonium. And this is perceived as Japan's plutonium problem. The Japanese government has declared that the plutonium stockpile will not be used for military purposes. However, it's inevitable that other countries are skeptical of such claim. Indeed, Japan is seen as a potential nuclear weapon state, a country that can have nuclear weapons whenever it wants to. Some in Japan call this a latent nuclear deterrence, and this casts a dark shadow over the security environment in East Asia. Japan's neighboring countries, China, South Korea, and North Korea, may regard Japan's latent nuclear deterrence as a threat, and tensions may arise between Japan and these countries. In addition, some have pointed out the risk of terrorists stealing plutonium. So, Japan's plutonium problem is a security issue as well as an international issue. And this leads us to the question, why does Japan possess 46 tons of plutonium in the first place? Plutonium is virtually non-existent in nature. Basically, plutonium can only be produced artificially. But how did Japan create plutonium? The answer is nuclear reprocessing. Now, what is nuclear reprocessing? Recycle is the key concept regarding Japan's nuclear policy. Specifically, Japan intends to recycle spent nuclear fuel in a process called nuclear reprocessing. Reprocessing is the technology to separate and extract plutonium from spent nuclear fuel. Since the beginning of nuclear power development, Japan has adopted a policy of full reprocessing. This means that Japan has a policy to reprocess all spent nuclear fuel to extract plutonium, which will be used as fuel for a nuclear reactor repeatedly. This is the so-called closed nuclear fuel cycle. Central to this cycle is reprocessing and fast breeder reactors called FBRs. FBR is a nuclear reactor that consumes plutonium as fuel, but it generates more plutonium than it consumes. The idea is to extract plutonium through reprocessing and use that plutonium as fuel for FBR. The FBR then generates more plutonium, which can be reused repeatedly. The nuclear fuel cycle is truly a dream plan in which the more you use the fuel, the more fuel you produce. Proponents of the nuclear fuel cycle claim that it enables the indefinite recycling of nuclear fuel. They also view reprocessing as an immediate measure to handle the problem of nuclear waste. Even so, reprocessing itself generates highly radioactive waste, which must be disposed anyway. So, the problem of nuclear waste remains unsolved. As a matter of fact, it's difficult to find a disposable site for nuclear waste when Japan is one of the most volcanic countries in the world. So in reality, this closed nuclear fuel cycle remains a dream plan. Japan's prototype FBR Monju has experienced numerous accidents, and the government decided to decommission it in 2016. It's absurd that Monju actually used far more electricity than it produced. Another non-military method of consuming plutonium is a type of power generation which uses a mixture of plutonium and uranium, MOX fuel, in a conventional light water reactors, or LWRs. However, this is not an effective solution since it's much cheaper to generate electricity with the uranium fuel. Also, this method makes waste management more difficult. In fact, the total amount of plutonium consumed in the last 5 years in Japan was only about 1.7 tons. As a result, Japan has accumulated about 46 tons of plutonium as of today. Regarding the current status of reprocessing in Japan, after Monju was decommissioned, Japan cooperated with France to jointly develop Astrid, a demonstration fast reactor. This Astrid project became the mainstay of Japan's nuclear fuel cycle plan, but France found that Astrid was uneconomical and abandoned the project. Meanwhile, there is an ongoing construction of Japan's large-scale reprocessing plant in Rokkasho Prefecture. The construction began in 1993, and the plant was supposed to start operation in February 2009. However, there has been successive problems, and as of September 2022, the completion date has been postponed 26 times. According to the Nuclear Reprocessing Organization of Japan, the cost of the nuclear fuel recycling business will be a whopping 16.87 trillion yen. As of November 20th, 2022, that's approximately $120 billion. This includes the cost necessary to run the MOX Fuel plant, and these costs will be charged to consumers through electricity bills. Accordingly, one can claim that Japan's reprocessing policy and the nuclear fuel cycle have completely failed. In spite of that, the Japanese government and the reprocessing contractor, Japan Nuclear Fuel Limited, are still envisaging to start operating the Rokkasho Reprocessing Plant someday. A few years ago, members of the energy project team at our organization, New Diplomacy Initiative, visited Washington, D.C. to share Japan's plutonium problem with members of the U.S. Congress. We learned that many of them were concerned about this problem from the perspective of nuclear proliferation. Indeed, it was the U.S. government's pressure to the Japanese government that changed the situation dramatically. On June 10, 2018, Japan's Nihon Keizai Shimbun reported on the front page that the U.S. demands Japan to reduce plutonium due to concerns over nuclear proliferation risk. This was just before the revision of the U.S.-Japan nuclear agreement, which was due to expire later in 2018, so the Japanese government had no choice but to respond to U.S. concerns. Also, on July 31st, 2018, Japan's Atomic Energy Commission introduced a new policy that Japan's plutonium stockpile would not exceed the current level. At the time this new policy was implemented, Japan's plutonium stockpile was about 47 tons, so this level should not be exceeded. Japan's plutonium policy had been rigid and rarely reviewed. In this sense, this new policy is epoch-making. It can be a reasonable step to respond to Japan's plutonium problem. Yet, as mentioned before, the Japanese government is still advocating the operation of the Rokkasho Reprocessing Plant. If commercial operation starts, more plutonium will be extracted from spent nuclear fuel. Still, in the current situation, FBR and power generation using MOX fuel are at a standstill. So, it's difficult to reliably consume plutonium in Japan. And if the Rokkasho Reprocessing Plant starts operation, Japan's plutonium stockpile will increase. So the question now is, will it be possible to solve Japan's plutonium problem while operating the Rokkasho Reprocessing Plant? The Japanese government needs to show a fair and just stance to the international community and sincerely respond to their concerns regarding Japan's plutonium stockpile. Thank you for listening, and if you want more information on this, please visit our website or information in the description. Thank you very much.